Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to part 2 of the logging trailer build. So in part 1, we were able to get the brackets done. That gave us a really strong concept and kind of gave us the platform to move forward into building the actual gantry. So the first thing we had to figure out was how we're actually going to mount the gantry to these brackets, and also are we going to use a pin or are we going to weld in tabs, like what the actual connection point is going to be. And this will really dictate, how we're going to put this thing on and off the trailer, because again, our trailer is multi-use, so we can't always leave the gantry on. So I started out, I had to cut up a bunch of mild steel on the horizontal bandsaw, and I would 100% recommend getting a bandsaw if you have the means to. It just makes the process much easier. After we got everything cut out on the bandsaw, I had to go over to the drill press and punch a couple holes in. I think I was drilling through 3/8 steel at this point, and none of the bits were working too well, so a bit of a struggle, but we ended up getting it done, which was good. So once we had most of our parts cut out, we started by laying out the 2 vertical pieces. So these are going to be the bottom pieces of the initial gantry. And like I said, we're trying to figure out the connection points. So on the ground, we lay these out to the width of the trailer, which was around 81 inches apart. And once they were parallel, we just started, really planning this out, talking it out, trying to figure out what we're going to do and, what, of course, between what material we even have access to, because again, we're just using whatever we have kind of lying around. Most of that material too is either left over from projects or was salvaged from some type of scrap or something like that. But kind of once we got our concept more solidified, I went ahead and started prepping them. And to prep for the MIG welder here, I use a flap disc on a grinder. So it's a 4-inch disc. It's either like a 40 or 60 or an 80 grit sandpaper on that disc. And I actually find that that's the best tool to kind of blast through the paint or rust, or even if you just have to chamfer your edges to get your welds so your beads fit in there really nice. And I really do prefer that over using a grinding wheel, because they tend to be a little more aggressive. They chew up the metal, and even just on your hands, the vibration alone, the difference from a flap disc to a grinding wheel, it'll save your body in the long run. So once we got some of those pieces tacked into place and we kind of had our vertical set, we started kind of playing on the floor, like laying out what the height of this thing is going to be, what the length of all these miters, because we were going to build this on a 45-degree arc and then meet it to horizontal, which might seem a little confusing, but it'll make more sense once you see it. All right, so we were pulling a late one, and we got the components pretty much all fabricated, and these are going to be the vertical posts for the gantry system. What we did, we tacked in a 3/8 plate, and then we took the hole saw, drilled out a 1 3/4-inch hole on both sides, and what we're going to use is this little piece of pipe. We're going to weld that around flush, and that's what's going to pin or act as the pivot point for our pin that's going to go through and then into our whatever we're calling these, brackets. So once we had those vertical pieces kind of tacked into place and assembled, we had already cut out the other components for the gantry. So at this point during the project, I really started taking my time going through all the prep. So taking that flap disc, making sure I got all the paint off, making sure all my chamfers are deep enough so that when I lay the bead, it's going to really sink in there and it'll be a nice weld, really strong with minimal cleanup. Now, the other thing I'd like to point out too is, like, while I'm doing this, I'm really taking my time to measure this out, make sure things are parallel and square, because it's much easier to do this before they're welded than after they're welded. And even if it's just tacked into place, it can still be fairly painful to go back in and grind it off and, make your fix then. So, all right, so got the gantry done. It's just tacked into place. By tacked into place, what I mean is that there's not a full weld running the whole seams. It's just literally little beads here and there just to hold these pieces in together while we, kind of figure everything out. Because we didn't really do any kind of like draft for this. We kind of did a little bit of math to figure out those 45-degree angles and what the lengths were and all that kind of stuff. But at least everything's nice and square and parallel to itself. All the measurements are really good, tacked in place. So it's good enough now that we could stand this thing up vertically, bring it over to the trailer, which is out there, and maybe put those pins in through that other connection that I showed. And then we're just going to see, like, where on the trailer does this thing fall? Does it look like when you're pulling a log, like how far would it lift it on? And that's really, with this type of project, which is the most fun thing, is that you're really experimenting real time. And instead of just having like a blueprint and you're just following plans and you just kind of go from A to B, this is much more like experimental. So it's really engaging and fun to do. And pretty much we've just been doing it after work anyways, so I'm out on jobs all day, and then I'll come back here, or when I have the time, and it's usually, late at night like this, where it's dark out, but just to get this done and get it going. So, like I said, next step, I'm gonna, I think, stand this thing up, and then maybe take those brackets and put them on C-clamps to the side of the bed, because we actually decided that we're gonna weld those into the side instead of bolting, like I said in the first video. Just because bolting, it just seems more painful to get this thing on and off. So we'll weld those little brackets with the receiving end in, stand this up, and then see how it works. Yeah. All right, so really quickly, I ended up just standing it up in here first. I really like the form. I like how square and parallel everything came out. Because this ground in here is not perfect. It's fairly flat, but I got to be careful when I weld up some of those connections that they don't like slip on each other. They got to be like nice and flush. But yeah, everything tacked up really well. About 100% sure that we are going to do more reinforcing with steel plate. Because even once we weld this up in the round, meaning like we're going to actually go around all the seams and lay a bead, I still don't think that's going to be quite stout enough. So we had this upstairs too. This is some 1/8 inch diamond plate steel. We'll take that, we'll cut some triangles out of it, and we're gonna make like gussets out of that, and that will really stiffen this holding up.